Tudors and the Stuarts. Yeah, it's the same family.
You've got D in history.
That's why we're here.
So this is my 6 times great-grandfather. I mean, look at that outfit. It's a bit like Blackadder. I mean, my mum would be delighted at this. Look, 3rd Earl of Bute, 2nd Earl of Bute.
I think you found your aristocrats.
Wow, I didn't know that. Mum's going to be over the moon.
Yeah. So if we keep going back.
His dad, another Stuart.
Yeah, and you can see that he marries a Campbell.
Yeah.
So the Stuarts and the Campbells, major Scottish clans.
Yeah, so that's quite a union, isn't it?
Yeah.
I love everything Scottish.
Right.
You know, I mean, Shara, my Scotland.
Right.
And I always wear a kilt at home. I mean, people don't know this, and Shara bans me from wearing it out and about because she says it looks ridiculous. But I love wearing a kilt around home. It's like everything feels free. And,
too much information, but
okay.
I
always wore the dogs in my kilts, and Shara's always going, but you've got no Scottish ancestry at all.
Well, you have. It's right there.
I'm literally going to be waving this at her.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm wearing the kilt.
Wear the kilt with pride.
Yeah.
So if we stick with the Campbell side, if we keep going back right to the top, Archibald Campbell, 1st Marquis of Argyll. So this is your 10th.
Oh wow! Look at that.
Great-grandfather.
That is quite a mullet as well. Look at that. Low here, the genius of the Great Argyll. Wow. Beheaded, May the 27th, 1661.
Yeah, he's a very interesting man.
Huh. I wonder who he upset and what he did. Sounds like a road trip to Argyll. Saddle up, team.
By following his maternal grandmother's line back through the centuries, Bear has discovered a connection to the powerful Stuart and Campbell clans of Scotland. Now he wants to find out how his 10 times great-grandfather, Archibald Campbell, Marquis of Argyll, lost his head. So he's come to the west coast of Scotland.
Finding out that I do have connection and ancestors, strong ancestors, all the way back through Scottish lineage, for me is exciting. My heart definitely missed a beat when I heard that, because to be honest, it's something I've always wanted. I've always related to the wild parts of Scotland.
Inverary Castle has been the seat of the Campbell clan since 1746.
Yeah, boy, look at that. What a castle. My big home.
Bear is meeting its current resident, the 13th Duke of Argyll.
Hi, Bear. Welcome to Inverary Castle.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
Hey, come on in. Welcome to a bit of your family heritage.
I don't think I've ever been to a castle like this. It's incredible. Look at that.
This is the highest freestanding ceiling in Scotland. It's 21 metres high. And we have one of the greatest collections of arms and armoury on display in Scotland.
I mean, there's some serious weaponry here.
We've got over 1,800 pieces on display.
Oh, wow.
Last used at the Battle of Culloden, which was the last pitched battle in Scotland. So I believe that your mother is my 9th cousin.
Yeah, so really this is also my ancestral home.
Well, exactly. It is the centre of the Campbell family.
Yeah.
And we're open to visitors during the summer.
I did come and pay my ticket. That wasn't quite what I was after. What about like a little acre up in the mountains?
Well,
let's build a bothy.
Exactly, you can have plenty of bothies.
I feel very proud. Look, you got the kilt as well.
Yeah, so this is Campbell tartan, and you're probably entitled to wear a Campbell tartan kilt.
Is that right? Oh, good.
You can go shopping and get some of this.
I love it. Okay, so Archibald, the Marquis of Argyll, would be my great-grandfather 10 times.
The great Marquis, yes. And I can take you through and introduce you.
So this was him. He looks quite stern, doesn't he?
He's quite austere. But, he was the great Marquis because of his very, very strong beliefs. He stood up for everything he believed in.
Yeah. So Archibald, Marquis of Argyll, beheaded
in Edinburgh by the maiden, the Scottish maiden.
What was it? What, a lady?
No. So
not a lady execution.
So the guillotine would come down on the back of your head.
Yeah.
And the Scottish maiden, they made you look up, and the guillotine came down as you watched it.
Yeah, well, that's probably less fun, isn't it? Yeah. Are you going to flinch at that?
To find out how his ancestor came to such a gruesome end,
I bet. I'm Claire.
Thank you so much.
Wanna sit
Thank
down?
you.
there is meeting historian Dr. Claire Jackson.
So, yes, I've seen the portrait.
Mm-hmm.
10 times great-grandfather came to a bad end, but I still don't know why.
So Marcus Argyle, he's born at a really sort of pivotal time in Scotland's history. So Scotland's got a Scottish-born king, Charles I, who's in London, and a lot of Scots are feeling that the way in which Charles I is taking the Church of Scotland, or seems to be wanting to take it, begins to look and sound like Catholicism. There's a new prayer book, there's a lot of ceremonial, and all of this seems to be in danger of corrupting what Scots feel is their true Protestant faith.
They probably don't like an English king saying, change, and here's more English in your faith.
And the Marquis of Argyle is someone to whom faith is really important. And it all culminates in 1638 with the creation of this document. And this is really where Argyle comes to prominence.
The Confession of Faith, subscribed at first by the king.
I've got a transcription if it helps.
Yeah.
So we can sort of see Will.
Okay, so what is this? The National Covenant Confession of Faith. So we all and every one of us underwritten protest that after long and due examination of our own consciences in matter of true and false religion, we are now thoroughly resolved in the truth by the Spirit and Word of God. So would the Marquis have written this?
He didn't write it, but he signed it and he comes to be associated with it. This is an iconic document in Scottish history.
So what's it really saying?
It's a protest. And everyone who signs it says, we subscribe to honour the true faith. So nobles like Argyle put their name to it, but so does everyone in a parish. So it really is a national covenant. In the king's eyes, it's treason, it's sort of insurrection. You know, who are my people to sort of point this out to me? They're bonding against me. And people become either Covenanters or royalists. And King Charles begins to lose authority in the British Isles, descends into civil war.
The Covenanters vowed to uphold their true Protestant faith, resisting changes being introduced to the Church of Scotland by King Charles I. And despite this being seen as an act of treason, Bear's 10 times great-grandfather, the Marquis of Argyle, became the movement's leader. 22 years later, the new king, Charles II, saw the Marquis still firm in his religious beliefs as a threat to his authority, so sentenced him to death.
Speech of the Marquis upon the scaffold. Look at this, his last words immediately before he laid his head upon the block. I know what many will expect, that I shall speak against the hardness of the sentence pronounced against me, but I will say nothing to it. Let the will of the Lord be done. I pray the Lord to preserve our present King, His Majesty. Wow, those are brave words of non-condemnation against a tough judgment of death.
It's a very sort of dignified moment as well.
I mean, you've got to admire his faith there. I think most of us mere mortals will be struggling a bit then.
And he's commended. I mean, the general impression is that this is somebody who goes to his death like a true Christian.
The way he wrote that, he was faithful to his king as well. He was asking for God's blessing on the king to the end. It feels hard.
I think whether you were Charles I or whether you were Charles II, I'm not sure you could rely on the Marquis to give you that kind of unquestioning loyalty you expect. Because for the Marquis, it's whether or not they will promote the Covenant, and all of them, to some extent, fall short.
So do you think, in a way, the new king goes, if there's doubt, there's no doubt?
I think
Here we
the
go.
new king probably feels that if one noble gets sacrificed...
And it costs him his life.
I've got one more document there.
Oh, look, I've seen that picture before. Instruction to a son by Archibald, late Marquis of Argyle, written in the time of his confinement. Wow, look, written to his son. Contents, chapter 1 on religion, chapter 2 of marriage, of friendship, of study and exercise. This is like a self-help book, isn't it?
This is drawing on an extraordinary life from someone who's been at the centre of politics, giving what they consider to be good advice.
Yeah. So look, a chapter on travel. One journey will show a man more than 20 descriptions, relations or maps. What a desolate life do tortoises live who cannot be rid of their shells. Basically saying, travel, it will broaden your mind.
It's quite adventurous, isn't it?
I mean, there's a lot in here, isn't there?
It's very influential in shaping how the Marquis is remembered, as well as being quite personal.
It's quite a book, but also it sort of speaks of living an adventurous life, being loyal, and for me, it's actually strange seeing those words, instructions to a son. I mean, that definitely brings a little tingle down my neck, because I wrote a book to our 3 boys, literally called To My Sons. You know, I wrote it, not many years ago. Mine's definitely a more lowbrow version, but the sentiment is the same.
300.
For me, it's weird. Yeah, 350 years ago.
In terms of sort of family and dynasty, I think that passage is quite interesting.
You see that to be descended of great personages is no exemption from the strokes of fortune. In other words, just because you're born into whatever doesn't mean it's all going to work out.
No.
So I guess, for me, it's interesting to see who these great personages are further back.
A good place to start would be the Argyll Mausoleum at Kilmun, where the Marquis was buried along with some of his ancestors.
Bear's Campbell clan ancestors have been buried on the site of Kilmun Parish Church since the 14th century. To find out who these great personages were, Bear's meeting historian Fiona Watson.
Oh, wow, the rain stopped for about a second.
Lovely to
Nice
meet you. I'm
meet you.
Fiona.
Hi, Fiona.
Shall we go around this way?
Yeah.
So here we are.
Wow, look at this.
It's amazing, isn't it?
So these are all dukes buried in here.
That's correct, yes.
So where's our guy?
Well,
Where's Archibald?
don't be looking for something too grand.
Oh, wow. Archibald Marquis of Argyll, beheaded 1661. So they put him on the floor.
This is it.
He also talked about these great personages in his family. And that bit I don't know what he was really referring to.
Well, if you turn round, you might get a bit of a clue there, because we've got some much earlier figures.
Oh, God.
Can you see Campbell at the end?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's, if you go about 3 words, it's Duncan.
Duncan Dominus.
Dominus, yeah.
So what's that? The Lord Duncan of Campbell.
Campbell. He's the first Lord
And
Campbell.
1455, so that's
Much
200 years earlier. But there are 2 of them there. Is that his wife behind?
Exactly. So this is Marjorie. She's the daughter of the Duke of Albany, and this is your 18 times great-grandmother.
Great-grandmother, yeah.
Yeah.
So tell me about Marjorie.
We haven't got any documents to show you, but there is more in this room that will tell you about Marjorie. There we are.
This chapel, standing on an ancient consecrated ground, was part of a church endowed by Duncan, Lord Campbell of Locheye, who lies here with his wife Marjorie, daughter of the Duke of Albany and granddaughter of King Robert.
So there you are.
I haven't heard of a King Robert.
King Robert.
My history's not very
That's
good.
okay. Well, this King Robert is the first Stuart king, but he actually has an even more impressive grandfather who's also called Robert.
Robert the Bruce?
Yes. Which means that Robert the Bruce is your 21 times great-great-grandfather.
He was a cool guy, Robert.
He was a very cool guy. I mean, I'm not sure I would always like to have met him, but he was an amazing military leader.
Robert Bruce was always like the warrior king, wasn't he?
He was a total warrior king. I mean, to be honest, he didn't start out that way. For the first year or so, he was rubbish. I mean, it was like everything you shouldn't do if you want to reconquer your kingdom. And he was forced west out to this part of Scotland and disappeared over the winter of 1367. And he came back, revolutionised.
So I wonder what happened during those winters.
Oh.
What was he learning?
He learned to use the terrain. He would fight in the winter. He understood how to gather men to him, get men to love him, get men to become hardened with him.
Yeah, it's Braveheart stuff. But he was, for me, always watching Braveheart, I never wanted to be part of like the English conquest. I always loved the guys who came from the hills and gathered all of their clan buddies and rose up and lifted the kilts
Absolutely, yes.
and fought. Do you know what I mean? And it's so interesting. It's like the original Special Forces.
Yes,
But that was way later.
absolutely.
An epic in these mountains.
Could you imagine? Could you imagine?
Bear's 21 times great-grandfather, Robert the Bruce, emerged from hiding in 1307 with a new style of warfare, eventually leading his army to a major victory over the English at the Battle of Bannockburn, making the Scots the preeminent military power in Britain.
I've actually got something that tells you about the character of Robert the Bruce, written
Yeah.
about 50 years after he was around.
The king set his watches that night and gave orders that they could eat. He bade them be comforted and make merry as best they could. R&R, very important.
Mm-hmm.
For being discouraged, as he said then, is the worst thing possible. For through great discouragement, men often fall into despair, and when a man is in despair, he's utterly beaten. You can read about many men who are far worse placed than we are now, and then our Lord gave them such grace that they fully achieved their aims. It's the ultimate never give up speech, really.
It really is.
Yeah. My memory of Robert the Bruce was something, there was this story of the spider,
Yeah.
and in a cave.
That's right. Because he's in this low period, he's in blackest despair, sees the spider, her making her web, the wind blows it away, she comes back, she just never gives
That's
up.
it, yeah. Yeah, even when the web gets destroyed, the spider keeps going. Well,
Absolutely.
and you can sort of imagine him in that cave in the winter going, never give up.
Never give up, yeah.
Yeah.
Even if the weather's like this.
Yeah, amazing. It's been a really moving journey for me, much more than I thought. My mum always kind of hoped we'd trace it back to some very regal, formal king. We got to a king, but it was a king that lived in the mountains and wore a kilt, and definitely was kind of rough with it, and I like that. You know, Robert the Bruce was a wild one, but for me it was nice to see that there are traits, that adventure spirit was always there. So it's kind of reassuring to know that I'm not alone in that. You know, a lot of my ancestors went through that journey as well, and with the benefit of hindsight, you can look at their lives and go, actually, it was worth pushing through and taking that quirky and more different route. You know, you look at my grandpa Ted, what he was doing was amazing, and I wish I'd known him as a young guy, and same with my great-grandpa Lionel. And then you go back, look at the Marquis old Archibald. I mean, wow, that a journey. Imagine if you write this, if you commit your faith on paper, you're going to probably pay for it with your life. So family really matters, and faith is important, and having a resilience in life, but also connection to the wild places. I hope that will always be part of my family going forward, because the wild has given me so much, and I never take that for granted.
Is there anything Bear is afraid of? Well, yes, actually, he chats to Louis Theroux, press read to watch on BBC iPlayer. And tomorrow, a disgraced British royal is sent off to Australia. Catherine Tate is Queen of Oz, new comedy, and that's at 9:30.
I couldn't believe how quickly my lovely city became divided.
Peace is actually realising you still completely disagree about it, but you're not going to kill each other.
I will never lift a gun again.
Once Upon a Time in Northern Ireland. Press red for all episodes on BBC iPlayer.
As MPs line up to support or damn Boris Johnson, what do people outside Westminster make of it? Or are they more concerned about rising bills and food prices? We're in the depot of food retailer Iceland. Joining our panel, Boris Johnson's former right-hand man and David Blunkett. We're on iPlayer now and BBC One after the news.
This is BBC One in the South. Now the BBC News with Sophie Rayworth and Edward Salt at 10 o'clock.
Tonight at 10, a highly critical report by MPs finds that Boris Johnson deliberately and repeatedly misled the House of Commons about lockdown parties. The committee says if the former Prime Minister had not resigned as an MP, it would have recommended a 90-day suspension.
This report, in its depth and it's a demolition of Boris Johnson's character and his conduct. And let's not beat about the bush on all of this. It concludes he lied.
Boris Johnson called the report the final knife thrust in a protracted political assassination. Also on the programme. A minute's silence in Nottingham city centre this evening as the families of the 3 people stabbed to death pay tribute to their loved ones and thank the huge crowd for their support. The public face of North Korea, the most secretive state in the world, a special report on state crackdowns that are making it even harder for people to survive. And one of our greatest movie actresses, Sir Michael Caine, leads tributes to Glenda Jackson, who has died at the age of 87.
Here in the south, on Clean Air Day, they claim Southampton is suffering some of the worst cruise ship pollution in Europe. And Pulp, George Ezra and Robbie Williams, 50,000 music fans, head to the Isle of Wight Festival.
Good evening. A highly critical report by a committee of MPs investigating Boris Johnson's claims about lockdown parties has concluded that he deliberately misled the Commons. The Privileges Committee said the former Prime Minister had closed his mind to the truth and committed acts of contempt of Parliament. They said if Boris Johnson had not resigned as an MP, he should have been facing a 90-day suspension from the House of Commons. The group of MPs from all parties, the majority of them Conservatives, pulled no punches. They found that Boris Johnson had repeatedly and deliberately misled MPs in the wake of the Partygate scandal, undermined the democratic process of the Commons, and was complicit in the campaign of abuse and attempted intimidation of the committee. Boris Johnson called the report's conclusion deranged. Our political editor, Chris Mason, is with me now. Chris.
Sophie, yes, today was about COVID rule breaking, testimony that said that Boris Johnson's Downing Street, the authors of those COVID restrictions, didn't bother with them themselves. It was an island oasis of normality, said one, as the rest of the country locked down. And yesterday was also about Boris Johnson. But what it was actually about was something else. At the core of all of this, a conversation about the fundamental pillars upon which public life and society at large is built: conduct, behaviour, believability, integrity. Or to put it another way, truth and lies.
So many chapters of Boris Johnson's life have his relationship with the truth running straight through them. Today, the latest chapter, a committee of his peers throwing the book at him. Was he honest about what went on in Downing Street during the very COVID restrictions he'd imposed on the rest of us?
All guidance was followed completely during number 10.
Really?
There was no party, and that no COVID rules were broken.
A senior civil servant, Sue Gray, investigated. So too the police. Today, another page turns. The conclusion, devastating for Mr. Johnson.
Let's be blunt, this report concludes that he lied. It says he deliberately misled MPs, he deliberately misled the committee. He breached their confidence by saying out loud what was in their report before they did, and that he was complicit in a campaign of abuse and attempted intimidation of the committee.
Look at what else the committee had to say. It takes aim at the frequency with which he closed his mind to the truth. And it said some of Mr. Johnson's denials and explanations were so disingenuous that they were deliberate attempts to mislead.
Is this the end, Mr. Johnson?
We're shouting at Boris Johnson because he said no to an interview. He put out a written statement instead, claiming the report is rubbish, a lie, deranged, absurd, and complete tripe.
Have you run out of roads?
And he said
I do not have the slightest contempt for Parliament or for the important work that should be done by the Privileges Committee. It is for the people of this country to decide who sits in Parliament, not Harriet Harman.
You've been there and seen it with your own eyes.
Harriet Harman is the Labour MP who chaired this investigation. He claims she was prejudiced against him from the outset, given things she had previously said. The report says its members were informed by the facts. Jacob Rees-Mogg was knighted by Boris Johnson and served in his cabinet. What did he make of the report?
Well, I think it's overbaked. That I think they want to find the worst at every possible opportunity. And I think it shows a degree of vindictiveness that does not work to the committee's favour or advantage.
Is this the end for Boris Johnson? No way back from this, is there?
There's easily a way back, because the great virtue of our system is that Parliament can chuck you out, and it can chuck you out again, and it can suspend you, but if your voters send you back you come.
Today's report came out at 9 a.m, but the Prime Minister managed to find himself in front of the cameras earlier than that, wanting to look like he's getting on with the job on an immigration raid in West London.
You're talking about a report that I haven't seen and no one else has seen. It wouldn't be right to comment on it in advance of it coming out and being published.
So he didn't fancy saying very much, but little tongue-tie from the opposition parties today.
Boris Johnson is not only a lawbreaker but a liar. He's not fit for public office and he's disgraced himself and continues to act like a pound shot Trump in the way in which he tries to discredit anybody who criticises his action.
He's built his entire career as a politician on being very shady with the truth, and what the committee has found is that he purposely lied to Parliament as Prime Minister.
Today, the final page turns on the former Prime Minister, COVID rule breaking, and the truth. The big question is whether the book is now closed for good on Boris Johnson.
Well, Chris is with me now, and that is the question. Is the book closed? Is the political story for Boris Johnson over?
That is the live conversation that is going on tonight amongst Conservative MPs as they weigh up the gravity of the conclusions of this report. Because the curiosity today was that today was shorn of its main element of jeopardy that we were anticipating with this publication of the report, expected to be the thing that would map out Boris Johnson's future. But because he's raced ahead to announce that he would leave Parliament, having seen a copy of the report himself a couple of days ago, we knew that any sanction that they talked about would have a gravity because of its scale, but beyond that, it wouldn't have a direct impact. And yet, such were the words, and indeed that suggested sanctions. So big were they that they have prompted one heck of a conversation amongst Conservative MPs. I'll just give you a quick insight into some of the texts that I've had tonight. A minister texting me saying, I do think people who think Boris is immortal are either paranoid or bananas. A couple of other conversations. One former cabinet minister saying that they felt that Boris Johnson, and this is someone who would be warm about Boris Johnson in the past, thrown away an image of being fun and witty, and now in their view was nasty and bitter. But some of those loyal to Mr Johnson saying this was a posturing Parliament at its worst and a mythology was building. On Monday, MPs will take a look at this. The expectations, I think they'll probably back what the report suggests. That's not the end of the story, though. By-elections in Uxbridge and in Selby and Ainsty, North Yorkshire, coming up in just over a month.
Chris Mason, our political editor. Thank you. Thousands of people have attended a vigil for the victims of the attacks in Nottingham city centre in the early hours of Tuesday morning. The families of the victims who died all addressed the huge crowd after a minute's silence. Police have been given more time to question a 31-year-old man who was arrested on suspicion of murder. It emerged today that he was a former student at the University of Nottingham. Our Midlands correspondent Navdesh Johal was at the vigil.
Silent, defiant, united. The people of Nottingham chose to stand together in pain and love. For the first time since the tragic events of Tuesday, at this vigil we heard from all three families of those who died. Starting with James Coates, one of school caretaker Ian Coates' three sons.
It feels like he's touched a lot of hearts over the years, more than what
reassumed and knew that he had. So it's been really nice and heartwarming to see the messages and the people come out and talk about how he was when they were younger and how he's helped them. Some beautiful comments. My dad was an avid fisherman. He loved his family, and he also loved his forest. You Reds.
After hearing from the fathers of 19-year-olds Barney Webber and Grace O'Malley Kumar the day before, it was the turn of their mums to remember their children.
He loved pesto pasta, but he hated cottage pie. He was obsessed with aeroplanes, and he still carried the dream of being a pilot in the RAF one day.
She also had a message for the crowd about the attacker.
He is just a person. Please hold no hate that relates to any colour, sex, or religion. I know silence is the traditional sign to show respect, and we've had that rightly so tonight. Can I just ask for you to do one more thing? To show us an enormous roar and round of applause for everyone affected by this tragedy.
She was a treasured and adored child. She wanted very few things in life. She wanted to be a doctor. She wanted to have fun. Because that's what all students want. They want to enjoy themselves. And all they were doing was walking home. We're just walking home after a night out.
Grace wasn't only just a sister to me, she was a best friend of mine, my mother, my father, all her friends. And if there's only one message that comes out of this, I urge you all to cherish every moment you spend with your loved ones, as you just never know when it will end. Thank you.
Sophie, there will be people watching at home wondering, just like they were here a few hours ago, how did those families, amid their grief, find the strength to speak so beautifully and powerfully in front of thousands of people? And I must make a special mention of Grace O'Malley Kumar's little brother, a young man who showed tremendous courage. And after hearing him speak, there were many who left here feeling inspired by his example.
Navtesh Johal in Nottingham. Thank you. Up to 600 people could be missing after a fishing boat carrying migrants sank off southern Greece on Tuesday. Doctors treating survivors say up to 100 children may have been on board, huddled in the ship's hold. At least 79 people are known to have died. More than 100 have been rescued. Our Europe correspondent Nick Beak is in Kalamata in Greece, where survivors have been taken. Nick.
Well, tonight, Sophie, there have been some protests against the government's handling of this crisis. But the truth is, their tougher approach to migration has proved popular among the public over the last couple of years. Clearly, though, there is a human impact to it. Now, the Coast Guard are maintaining that when they offered help to the migrants, that help was rejected. But lots of people are saying that if you can see a boat is so overcrowded and in such deep waters, there is a moral obligation to intervene. Relatives of the hundreds lost at sea rushed to this port city, fearing the worst. We found Aftab from Wolverhampton, searching for news about his cousins from Pakistan.
The relatives were on the boat that capsized.
How do you know that?
We've got confirmation that we found one of the relatives is in there, but the rest of them we haven't got hold of yet.
How many relatives?
Just 4 of them.
The victims of Greece's worst ever migrant shipwreck had set off from Libya. Many Syrians were on board, Qasim Abu Zeid told me, including his wife.
How would I feel? I lost my wife now. I don't know where is she now. So of course, it's my wife.
21-year-old Isra Ahun had been unable to find a legal route to join her husband in Germany. This evening, we went to meet Dr. Macaris. He treated 30 of the survivors, who told him dozens of children had been on board.
They told us that there were children in the bottom of the ship, children and women. One told me about 100 children, the other told me about 50.
Lots of children.
Lots of the children.
Hanging over this tragedy is one simple question. Should the Greek authorities have done more to save those on board? The Coast Guard says the migrants didn't want their help, a claim that's been challenged. So we've been trying to piece together exactly what happened in this disaster that seemed to unfold in slow motion. At around 8 a.m. on Tuesday, the Greek authorities are first informed about the fishing vessel. The Coast Guard has first contact at 11 a.m. and claims it doesn't request assistance. A little later, an emergency helpline for migrants in trouble at sea receives multiple distress calls, including one at 3:20 p.m. saying the captain has left the vessel. The migrant boat has no publicly available tracking data, but BBC Verify has used a ship monitoring website to follow the movements of boats in the area that offered assistance. At 3 p.m, Blue sends a nearby commercial vessel, the Lucky Sailor, to the migrant boat, supplying it with food and water. Tuesday evening, a Coast Guard vessel sails near the fishing boat and from a distance apparently concludes there was no problem with its navigation. But less than 4 hours later, the migrant boat overturns and sinks. The Greek authorities, as well as fending off criticism, have been making arrests, up to a dozen. But who was really to blame for such a huge loss of life is being fiercely debated. Nick Beake, BBC News in southern Greece.
The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, the former Prime Minister, David Cameron, and England's Chief Medical Officer, Sir Chris Whitty, are among senior advisors and politicians who will give evidence to the UK's COVID-19 inquiry next week. The first stage of the inquiry is currently looking at the UK's preparations for a pandemic, including whether officials were too focused on the idea that the next pandemic would be flu. Our health editor, Hugh Pym, is with me now. Big getting down to business fast.
Yes, Sophie, a really heavyweight cast list next week. Now, David Cameron and George Osborne, I think, will be asked about their term in office, 2010 to 2016. What did they know about pandemic planning then? Did they give enough resources to the NHS to be resilient? Jeremy Hunt, now Chancellor, of course, he was Health Secretary covering England for 6 years, from 2012. There was a big pandemic planning exercise on his watch, which assumed it would be flu, and it showed the whole thing coming under severe strain under those scenarios. Then there's Oliver Dowden, now Deputy Prime Minister. He was Cabinet Office Minister for a couple of years immediately before the pandemic. He'll be a witness as well. And of course, Sir Chris Whitty and Sir Patrick Vallance, very well known during the whole coronavirus saga, but they held senior jobs before that as well. And I think a key thing here is that families of the bereaved tell us they want to know what more could have been done to prevent all this. Was the UK adequately prepared? And one witness today, a former senior civil servant involved in contingency planning, said he thought overall preparedness for the pandemic was inadequate.
Hugh, thank you. Now, we've heard a lot in recent weeks about artificial intelligence, computers starting to act and respond almost as if they are human. AI is developing fast and it's transforming many aspects of modern life. But there have been warnings from some of the founding engineers of the technology that it could be used for malicious purposes. Now, though, one of the so-called godfathers of AI has told the BBC that he isn't so worried. Our technology editor, Zoe Kleinman, can tell us more.
The person pouring the cold water on the greatest fears surrounding artificial intelligence is Professor Yann LeCun, head of AI at Facebook's owner Meta. Speaking in Paris, he said, the scenario we're going to turn on the computer and immediately it's going to take over the world, that's just preposterously ridiculous. The fear is that the technology is evolving very rapidly and could put many people out of a job. He said it would change work, but said it's going to create shifts in professions. A lot will disappear, but a lot of them are going to appear. The same way 20 years ago, you couldn't imagine a YouTuber making a living. He also thinks it's highly unlikely that AI systems will be more intelligent than humans anytime soon. Professor Lequesne's words are a sharp contrast to those of the other two men he worked with on the science that underpins modern AI. Dr. Geoffrey Hinton retired recently and he said he regretted his life's work. Professor Yoshua Bengio says he worries about bad actors misusing the tech. Both academics and the companies building AI agree that regulation is the best way to try to maximize its benefits and minimize the risks. ChatGPT, for example, was unheard of this time last year. Jan LeCun is confident that AI will be a useful tool rather than a master, and he heralded a new renaissance for humanity. ChatGPT couldn't put it better. Zoe Kleiman, BBC News.
North Korea is the most secretive state in the world. Its borders have been sealed for more than 3 years now, making it impossible to know what is happening there. Over the past 6 months, the BBC has been secretly communicating with 3 people inside North Korea with the help of an organisation called Daily NK, which has a network of sources. Last night, we heard stories about people who are starving to death because food is so scarce. Tonight, we hear how the state crackdowns are making it even harder for people to survive. Because we can't identify the 3 people we've been talking to, we have used animations and actors to speak their words. Our Seoul correspondent Jean McKenzie reports.
This is the world's most tyrannical state. Its supreme leader rules by terror. But Kim Jong-un is tightening his grip, pushing his people to their limits.
Every day it gets harder to live. One wrong move and you're facing execution.
This is Chan Ho, one of 3 North Koreans who've risked their lives to tell us what's been happening since the country cut itself off from the world. We've changed their names and illustrated their words using actors and animations.
If I live according to the rules, I feel like I'll starve to death. But just by trying to survive, I could be arrested by the state security, branded as a traitor, and killed.
One way to survive North Korea is to escape across the border to China. But Kim Jong-un has begun walling his people in, installing fences and surveillance cameras. Guards have been ordered to shoot anyone attempting to cross. Myeon Suk is a market trader living close to the border.
The government strictly controls the border, using COVID as an excuse. But really, it's to stop the smuggling and people crossing the river to China. If you even approach the river, you'll be given a harsh punishment. There's almost nobody crossing now.
Those who dare to try now gamble with their lives.
A friend's son told me about several closed-door executions he saw. Each time, 3 to 4 people would be executed. The crime was trying to escape. People are stuck here and waiting to die.
Sealing the border has also allowed Kim Jong-un to shut out the thing he fears the most: foreign films and TV programs. These are the only way North Koreans can learn about the prosperous world outside their borders. South Korean videos pose the biggest threat. Those who share them can now be executed. This propaganda video shows people being publicly punished.
I was taken in for questioning. I'm more afraid of people now.
Ji-yoon told us many of her friends and their children have also been interrogated.
At a court in Pyongyang, the local leaders were gathered to judge a 22-year-old man in a public trial. He'd gone around spreading South Korean songs and films. His punishment was 10 years and 3 months in hard labor camp. Before 2020, this would have been a quiet trial, with perhaps 1 year in prison. People were shocked.
We've brought our interviews to the UN team that investigates human rights in North Korea.
Well, okay. quite sobering. You shouldn't be reprimanded, let alone jailed or even executed for consuming foreign media. They are very serious violations of human rights, and in fact, in the past, the Commission of Inquiry of the UN has said that these can, in many cases, amount to crimes against humanity.
But amidst the fear, there are small signs that people's loyalty to the regime is waning.
Before COVID, people viewed Kim Jong-un positively. We hoped perhaps that he'd rule in a new way. But now almost everybody's full of discontent.
Nobody believes the propaganda on TV. The state says we are nestling in a mother's bosom. But what kind of mother would execute their child in broad daylight for running to China because they were starving?
At one of the hardest times in North Korea's history, the state is closing in on every front. People have nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. Jean Mackenzie, BBC News.
Well, we put our findings to the North Korean government. Its embassy in London said that the information collected isn't entirely factual, as it's derived from fabricated testimonies from anti-democratic People's Republic of Korea forces. It has always prioritised the interests of the people, even at difficult times, it said, and has an unwavering commitment to the well-being of the people. The Oscar-winning actress Glenda Jackson, who went on to become a Labour MP, has died at the age of 87. She started out in acting in the 1950s on stage and screen before quitting to take up politics as the MP for Hampstead, declaring that an actor's life is not interesting. But she did go back to it in later life, and today Sir Michael Caine described her as one of our greatest movie actresses. David Sillito looks back at her life.
If that is your opinion, you had better hide your face indeed. Your Majesty has only to say. I have said!
1971, Glenda Jackson, Elizabeth R., a mesmerising 9-hour life of Queen Elizabeth I.
I am a woman. You have wives, you have children, you know what it is to love and be loved.
That same year, she won an Oscar for Women in Love.
You don't think one needs the experience of having been married? I don't want us to live like this.
It was also the year of Sunday Bloody Sunday, which brought another Oscar nomination.
Darling, you couldn't do it.
You must be hungry for something.
That's true. And on Christmas Day, she wrapped it all up as the star turned on Morecambe and Wise. The daughter of a builder and a cleaner from Birkenhead, who'd grown up in a 2 up, 2 down, was at the very pinnacle of the acting world.
How does it feel? Very nice.
She was nominated for an Oscar 4 times, but was always too busy to actually attend. Acting was, she said, a serious job for a serious person, and she brought much of that spirit to her 23 years as an MP. She was briefly a transport minister in Tony Blair's first government, but her politics were very much rooted in the passions and values of old Labour.
No care for the weaker. Rumble thy belly full!
And then, in her 70s, an honour-strewn return to acting.
They all think they can treat me like this.
Her death comes just weeks after finishing her final film alongside Sir Michael Caine. It was, he said, as wonderful an experience this time as it was on their first film together 50 years ago. I shall miss her.
This is our home, all this.
Glenda Jackson, from Elizabeth to Lear, on stage and screen, regal, commanding, funny, serious, moving.
Glenda Jackson, who has died at the age of 87. Time now for a look at the weather. Stav Danaus is with me in a rather beautiful sunset.
Isn't it gorgeous, Sophie? Yeah, more of that to come, but we've got some changes to the weather as well. Good evening to you. Low pressure is starting to edge ever closer to our shores. That's going to bring showers, even longer spells of thundery rain over the weekend. Could do with some more rain. It's been so dry and so sunny of late. This is the area of low pressure I'm talking about, slowly edging towards us, sending a few weather fronts out. Tonight, we could even see a couple of showers or thunderstorms arrive across Cornwall, maybe Devon as well. But most places will be dry, the odd mist patch here and there, clear skies. Temperatures dipping into single digits, parts of northeast England, northeast Scotland again. It's quite cool there, but for most it's going to be mild. We start off with the sunshine tomorrow morning. Any mist patches clear away. Could have showers on the word go across Cornwall, Devon. These becoming more widespread across Wales, Northern Ireland, parts of west and southwest Scotland. Maybe the Isle of Man as well into the afternoon period. But much of the country, central and east areas, will stay dry. Lots of sunshine. Be up to 26, 27, maybe 28 degrees once again. Now for the weekend, it looks like we'll start to see more showers, even longer spells of rain. It'll still be on the warm side, particularly when we get the sunny spells, not as hot as it has been. So this is Saturday's picture then. Most of the showers and thunderstorms will be out west. A few could affect the southeast. Some low cloud murk affecting some eastern coastal areas of England and also northeast Scotland, but there will be a lot of sunshine towards the east. Again, a warm day, 25, maybe 26 degrees, a little bit cooler further west. Sunday, there will be more cloud around, the chance of some thundery rain across southern Britain, spreading its way northwards as we go through the day on Sunday. So some areas really could be quite wet. So because of more cloud, more showers around Sunday, not quite as warm, still above the seasonal norm, generally 20 to 23 degrees. And then into next week, low pressure always nearby to the west of us, so plenty of showers around, particularly to the north and the west, but there's signs of it starting to turn sunny and warmer again across England and Wales towards the end of the week. Stay tuned. See you later. Sophie.
Steph, thank you very much. And that's it from the BBC News at 10. There's more on the day's main stories on Newsnight with Victoria Derbyshire, which is just about to get underway over on BBC Two. The news, though, continues here on BBC One. It's time now for the news where you are. From the news team at 10, it's goodbye.
Sophie, thank you. Good evening to you. I'm Edward Sultan. You're watching South Today. Southampton is suffering some of the worst cruise ship pollution in Europe. The study by the Transport and Environment Campaign Group comes on Clean Air Day. It claims cruise ships are responsible for almost 10 times more harmful pollutants than the city's 90,000 cars. Our transport correspondent Paul Clifton reports.
Today's study states that toxic air pollutants from cruise ships have returned to pre-pandemic levels. It says that, taken overall, Europe's 218 cruise ships emitted as much sulfur dioxide last year as 1 billion cars.
Southampton, as a cruise ship port, is actually the 7th most polluted port within Europe. The quantity of pollution from cruise ships in Southampton, certainly in terms of oxides of sulfur, one of the worst air pollutants, is actually around about 10 times more, thanks to cruise ships, than all the cars in Southampton produce within a year.
It's not surprising that Southampton features on the list of most polluting cruise ports, given it is also one of the largest. The report says the most cruise emissions come from Carnival Corporation ships. That's not surprising either, given it's by far the largest operator here. It wouldn't be interviewed, but told us Carnival is the only major cruise company producing fewer greenhouse gas emissions today than in 2011, despite our 30% increase in capacity. Look at the haze ships produced, anchored in Weymouth Bay during the pandemic. The industry is making efforts to clean up. A small proportion of cruise ships now plug in to shoreside power in Southampton, meaning they burn less fuel when they're in port. Increasingly, new ships are powered by liquefied natural gas, which is cleaner than fuel oil.
Cruise vessels movements generally represent less than 5% of the overall maritime activities in these ports. And we should always be reminded that you have 60,000 vessels in the world in the maritime fleet, and cruise vessels are 350 more or less vessels.
There is no doubt that cruise ships are significant contributors to Southampton's air quality problem. The claim that they are far more significant than all the cars in the city put together is contentious. Paul Clifton, BBC South Today, Southampton Docks.
This week's extreme weather is being blamed for the deaths of hundreds of fish which have suffocated in a stretch of the Oxford Canal. Peter Cook's been to Banbury, and we should warn you that you may find some of the images upsetting.
Banbury is one of 25 locations across the country where fish and other wildlife have died in recent days. Experts say the animals suffocated after a drop in the water's oxygen levels due to the torrential rain on Monday, combined with high temperatures. Members of a local boatyard have called it an environmental disaster.
We were very concerned about whether we could actually operate the business because we were getting the oil coming into the dry dock, so we didn't want to flood the dry dock and get all the fish and nasty bits and pieces into the dry dock itself.
Canal and River Trust says it's investigating and trying to resolve the problem.
By spraying the water into the air, it will pick up oxygen. We're also trying to create as much water movement as we can.
The water's surface remains oily as the fish break down. It's likely to be some days before it's back to normal. Peter Cook, BBC South Today.
The man accused of murdering Met Police Sergeant Matt Ratner has told a court he didn't mean to pull the trigger despite pointing the gun at the victim. Louis de Zoycha is accused of shooting dead Matt Ratner from Goring by Sea in West Sussex in 2020. De Zoycha denies murder. The Sandbanks ferry in Dorset was suspended this afternoon after a car rolled into the water off a slipway. The vehicle, which was empty at the time, went into the harbour entrance on the Sandbanks side at around 2:30 this afternoon. Police say no one was injured in the incident and ferry services are now back to normal. Now, thousands of music fans have begun arriving on the Isle of Wight tonight for this year's Isle of Wight Festival. Yes.
Welcome.
You have to get that bit. Yes, an estimated 55,000 people heading to the island for a weekend-long musical celebration. Headlining this year, of course, are Pulp, George Ezra, the Chemical Brothers, and Robbie Williams.
It's not easy to book them. You have to work out when their tour cycle is, when they're available, how much they're going to cost, and it takes probably about 18 months to 2 years ahead. We've already made offers for groups for next year.
One Republic, I think. And just the whole vibe. It's just lovely here. Sunday night, Robbie Williams.
But what will the weather be like? Let's find out. Here's Alexis.
Hello, good evening. It's been a very warm day once again today. We have had a bit of a breeze coming in from the east. Tomorrow's a dry day with sunny spells also, and there will be areas of cloud, hazy sunshine at times with some high cloud. Overnight tonight, there will be clear skies for many places. It stays dry with fairly light winds. And we are looking at maybe the possibility of one or two mist patches with a low of 11 to 14 Celsius. Lots of sunshine first thing tomorrow, blue skies overhead. As the day progresses, we will see some fair weather cloud build and also some high level cloud, particularly for western areas, turning the sunshine hazy. But temperatures will be up to the mid-20s, 25, possibly 26, even 27 Celsius. And there is a bit of a breeze blowing down towards the southeast. As we look ahead to the weekend, Saturday, mainly dry conditions, more cloud developing as we head through the course of the afternoon, maybe the odd shower for western areas, but generally it should stay dry. And Sunday, that's where we can see some heavy thundery rain affecting many places through the course of the day.
And that's the news of the Saturday. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again, same place, same time tomorrow. Good night.
Your dumb brother, as well as writing bars.
What songs are on Jamie? Everyone knows that I can make you a star.
It's my family to get the name champion. Winners only. Champion to the world.
It's champion versus champion now. So get ready.
Brand new Champion. Coming soon to BBC One and iPlayer.
Cliff, don't do this. That document's the only proof we have.
No, we don't need this. I changed the TV license. Everyone's going paperless now.
Oh, okay. Great.
Managing your TV license needn't be a drama.
Sorry about that.
Go paperless at tvlicensing.co.uk.
Some people just have a darkness inside them.
Yes, France, Mrs. Diamendi.
May we come in?
Of course. The police came to see me.
What do you want to do?
Sometimes people end up in the wrong place at the wrong time.
She's working with some... I don't believe the person who did it had any control.
She's playing with Miss Jackson. She has been from the start.
We hunt together. Starts Monday the 26th of June on BBC One and iPlayer.
Well, it's been quite a week. Time to reflect. Now on BBC One with Fiona Bruce and tonight's audience.
Tonight, as Boris Johnson is officially branded a liar by a committee of MPs set up when he was Prime Minister, he calls it the deranged conclusion of a kangaroo court. Well, our audience here certainly wants to discuss that, but also for many, the rather more pressing matter of rising bills and food prices. And today we're in a rather special location, the distribution depot of Iceland, the food retailer, which has over 1,000 stores in the UK. We're in Deeside, the name for the group of towns on either side of the Welsh-English border. Welcome to Question Time. On the panel from the government, David T.C. Davis, the Secretary of State for Wales. Before that, he was a junior minister under Boris Johnson, and after his resignation as an MP last week.
And we'll hear more from Nick later. The report today concluded Boris Johnson deliberately misled the House, deliberately misled the Privileges Committee, breached confidence, impugned the committee, thereby undermining the democratic process of the House, and was complicit in the campaign of abuse and attempted intimidation of the committee. We'll unpick the politics in a moment. First, what's the response from a mother who lost her 14-year-old son during the pandemic, not from COVID, but from leukemia? Louise Bennett from Warwickshire is here. Welcome to Newsnight. And according to this committee, you were misled deliberately by the then Prime Minister of the country on 9 different occasions.
Yeah, and I think looking at Boris Johnson in Parliament when he was talking about it, it was clear that he was lying. There was no way that those facts that we were presented with could be construed in any other way. But you watched it and you're like, well, actually, this is the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is standing at the dispatch box and saying that things categorically didn't happen. So you almost start to sort of question yourself and think, well, maybe the rules, maybe it was me that misinterpreted the rules. Maybe, we weren't, we were being overcautious. So I think it's really important that today somebody or the committee stood up and said, no, you did the right thing. You were behaving properly and he has lied to you to just save his career for a little bit longer.
When the pandemic began, your boy, Fred, 14 years of age, was being treated in Birmingham Children's Hospital and later Great Ormond Street. And you and your husband had to make very difficult decisions, painful decisions about who would spend time with him in the final weeks of his life.
Yes, so for a while we were able to swap over. So one of us could stay with Fred while the other one was at home. As the pandemic progressed, the rules changed so that when we went to Great Ormond Street, only I was allowed. My husband wasn't allowed in the hospital for quite some time. And then Fred's condition deteriorated so badly that the hospital decided that my husband was allowed to come. So we could be together for, I think, possibly the last sort of 10, 11 days of Fred's life. But our younger son, who was having to travel 100 miles away with my family, didn't see Fred for the last sort of 3 to 4 weeks of his life.
How do you feel about that? I think we have got some beautiful pictures of Fred, actually. Yeah.
I think, obviously it was really difficult and it was always going to be a heartbreaking and really difficult thing to go through. COVID made it far more complicated and far more traumatic and far more difficult. But we understood why that was necessary. We wanted to keep everybody safe. We wanted to keep the hospital staff safe who were doing incredible things and going to incredible lengths to look after us. So we had no problem with obeying the rules because they needed to be obeyed. It was an unprecedented situation that we had to deal with.
What's your message to Boris Johnson, if you have one?
I think my message to Boris Johnson was that our morale really needed boosting, and the morale of every doctor and nurse who looked after us at that time really needed boosting. in the time Fred was in hospital and in the months afterwards when we were grieving at home by ourselves. We didn't have cheese and wine in the party after Fred's funeral. We went home by ourselves because that was what he told us to do.
Thank you very much for being with us, Louise Bennett. Brendan Clark-Smith is here. We'll talk to him in a moment. I just want to tell you a little bit more about Boris Johnson's statement. He said today was a dreadful day for MPs and democracy. This decision means no MP is free from vendetta or expulsion on trumped-up charges by a tiny minority who want to see him or her gone from the Commons. Mr Clark-Smith was elected as MP for Bassetlaw in 2019, a seat that had been Labour since the 30s, and you credit Mr Johnson for that win, I know. How do you respond, first of all, to Louise Bennett?
Well, first of all, I'm very sorry to hear about Fred, and you have my sympathy. And as a parent, I can imagine it must be the absolute worst thing in the world. I was bereaved during COVID as well.
Exacerbated by the fact that the Prime Minister was lying to.
But as was, of course, Boris Johnson. He spent time in ICU himself, of course. I'm sure he completely understands. But again, exactly what this is about today. This is about Parliament in particular, and we're not re-examining COVID as a whole. Lots of tragedies happened during COVID all around the world. It's a terrible thing. Of course, we try our best with that.
Do you want to say anything about the fact that the committee, the report, which Boris Johnson has called a lie, you have called the report spiteful, vindictive, and the committee a kangaroo court? I mean, why are you indulging in what the committee calls a campaign of abuse and intimidation?
Well, I'd say they've overreached as well there. And again, it was very specific parameters. They were looking at what he said in Parliament. Now, Boris Johnson, he's given evidence to the committee. He's sent evidence in there as well, and he's been very clear.
And they decided he lied. He misled on 9 occasions.
But unless they've got a crystal ball, how they can know that he intentionally did that, I don't know. I don't know what other people are thinking, of course, and what Boris Johnson said.
Have you read this report?
I have, and the information that Boris Johnson was given by people who he'd asked for that and he was briefed on. Now, this happens all the time with ministers where they will go to the dispatch box, they will give a statement on something, and sometimes the facts will change later on. They'll find out extra information. They will come to the dispatch box. They will correct the record.
He didn't do that, according to this report. He didn't do that.
Well, Boris Johnson corrected the record at least a couple of times.
No, not according to the committee's report today. Are you sure you've read it?
Which specific bit are we referring to?
They said he purported to come to the Commons and correct the statement. But they weren't satisfied he had. That was another contempt.
Well, I've sat in the House myself where Boris Johnson has stated quite clearly that things had gone off in Downing Street. He apologised for that. Of course, there was all the furor about the FPN, which he accepted. Of course, the Metropolitan Police only considered that one event there counted that.
This is about lying. We're not talking about Partygates and fines now. This is about lying. Anti-democratic, Mr Johnson called it. I don't know if you agree with that.
Well, it's not a case of whether it's democratic or not. I mean, democratic to elect your MPs, obviously, and it's the public who decide where we are. But what you expect is a fair hearing. You expect people to go into that without any prejudice before you start, and you expect to be able to give evidence and for it to be considered. Now,
which he did.
Well, the chair of that committee already had to recuse himself. The chair that was appointed afterwards has already been found to make comments prejudging Boris Johnson as well.
Mr Johnson had multiple occasions to give evidence. He presented written evidence, he presented oral evidence, he had 250 grand of taxpayers' money to pay for his lawyers, even though he's earned £6 million since September. I mean, you're not saying he's a victim here, are you?
Well, I wouldn't have had the inquiry in the first place, quite frankly, because I think
that wasn't the question.
Well, I mean, the point is he is entitled to defend himself.
And he has. What was my question?
Well, he's entitled to defend himself with the facts that are there. He's very forthcoming towards the committee. He does not feel he has been treated fairly. Now, if you look at his statement that he said, he's identified a number of areas where he doesn't feel that process has been followed correctly, where they've gone outside the original remit with the definitions and so on. And then he's also raised specific questions about the committee itself. Now, if I were Boris Johnson, I'd want all those addressed. Now, he's resigned as an MP. He's already gone now.
So he's avoided democracy, actually. He's chosen not to put his case to you and your colleagues in the House on Monday, and he's chosen not to face voters in his own constituency. That's how much he likes democracy.
Well, he agreed to this on the basis that he thought he would get fair treatment, and when he saw the report, he felt that that was not the case, and it wouldn't be possible to actually do that.
When the committee finds he deliberately misled, he decides, oh no, I think this is an unfair process.
But the committee again has changed. They've changed from the number of days. Even today, we've heard they've added extra on for criticising the committee. Now, as a parliamentarian, you expect to be able to scrutinise. You expect to be able to object to be able to debate. If you're not going to able
Not
to
trash it though.
well, not trash it, no, and we accept they've got a very difficult job to do on these committees. I have a lot of respect for people
No, you
who do
don't.
it.
What, you're calling them a kangaroo court. Don't be disingenuous.
Well,
you don't have respect for them.
Well, I said I'd read the report first. I did that. I read the report when it was published, and then when I've looked into it. And if we're talking about courts, Victoria, if this were a real court of law, this would have been thrown out straight away. There is no way, on the basis that this has been set up, in terms of how it's decided, in terms of the evidence is there, that this would pass the
You're a
threshold.
member of the House of Commons. Parliament instructed the committee to do this. Boris Johnson set the Privileges Committee up. There is a debate and a vote on Monday on the report. You'll be voting against it.
I certainly will, yes.
Why don't you want to stand up for honesty and integrity in public life?
Well, that's what I feel as I'm doing. Now, the easiest thing in the world would be for me to either not be there on Monday or to nod it through. Instead, I'm standing up for what I think is right. And I think when you actually stand by people, that's when it actually shows some real integrity, because what we're doing is defending colleagues. Now, if it were another colleague in the House of Commons who had the same thing, I would expect them to get a fair hearing as well. I don't believe Boris Johnson has.
Those Conservative colleagues that vote for this report on Monday, assuming they turn up, should they face deselection, as Nadine Dorris has suggested?
Well, it's a free vote, and I think it should stay a free vote. It's a House matter. It's not
Sure.
a party political
Should they face
matter.
deselection in their constituencies?
No. I mean, I think it's for individual constituencies to speak to their members of parliament about how they feel, about what promises they've made, and about what they think is reasonable and with their own consciences. So I would never go as far as saying that, no. But what I would say is that I think they should look at it. I think they should make their own decision on it. And certainly I would urge them to vote against this, because I do think it has gone too far. I think it is spiteful and vindictive. Taking his parliamentary pass away from him as a former prime minister is quite unprecedented.
Because he was a prime minister and he misled the House and the country. That's why they're suggesting a suspension of 90 days and removing the pass. It's all the more serious, the committee said, because he was the prime minister.
But of course, most of this is for the criticism of the committee. Margaret Ferrier, of course, only had 30 days suspension. This is I think it's the second biggest one they've ever issued.
Yeah, this was the prime minister of the country, lying to the country on multiple occasions.
But they've not provided a single shred of evidence to say that Boris Johnson knowingly did this. Now, they can surmise and they can suggest that he's done it, and they can put forward and repeat it a lot. And most of us have seen this in Twitter over recent weeks. So when we talk about confidentiality, I think there's certainly an issue there as well. I don't believe Boris Johnson did. I think he said to the best of his abilities and what he'd been provided with. I think he corrected the letter later. And I hope on Monday this will be voted down, and I'll certainly be encouraging colleagues to do that.
Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you. Brendan Clark-Smith. Now we can speak to Lord Barwell, who is a former Housing Minister and former Downing Street Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Theresa May. Thank you very much for your patience and for being with us. What do you make of the 90-day sanction? Is that going too far?
I think, as the committee implied, the sanction was increased because of the way Boris Johnson has behaved in the last few days. So they say very clearly in the reports that they had got a unanimous agreement for a suspension of more than 10 days, which would have triggered a recall petition. But they then increased that suspension because of the campaign of intimidation that he has directed against the committee over the last few days.
One anonymous supporter of Boris Johnson described it as a punishment beating. I wonder if that narrative of Mr. Johnson being persecuted makes it easier for supporters to rally round him and his cause.
It's straight out the Donald Trump playbook, isn't it? Essentially, that you deny, there's no contrition at all, and you have a campaign of disinformation and conspiracy theories. That's what we saw in his letter on Friday. That's what we've seen from a number of his supporters over the last few days. I was very interested just to hear Brendan just then say that if it was up to him, he wouldn't have had the inquiry at all. It is perhaps worth reminding your viewers that the House of Commons voted to have the inquiry and not a single MP objected to that, and they approved the members of the committee and not a single MP objected to that. So the whole House of Commons gave these members of Parliament on this committee this job to do. They've done the job incredibly thoroughly. They've taken repeated evidence from Boris Johnson. For any of your viewers that haven't read the report, perhaps, Victoria, the most striking thing is that they actually gave Boris a way out. They said to him, if you just say to us that actually you accept that this was a misleading phrase that was used, it's clear that they would have given a much lower tariff. But he refused, even at that point in time to acknowledge what he's done is wrong. And that's why I think you've got the severity of the punishment you have. And you were quite right in what you said when you were questioning Brendan. This is an incredibly serious matter. This is the Prime Minister, the most senior politician in the country, having been found to deliberately mislead the House of Commons and the whole country on a fundamentally important issue. We heard from Louise earlier in your programme about what this meant to people. And not just once, did it repeatedly. And then when brought to before the committee to give evidence, misled the committee as well. So this goes to the heart of our democracy and how it works. If we can't trust the Prime Minister to tell the truth, or at least tell what he believes to be the truth, where are we?
Let me ask you about the current Prime Minister. Not a word from Rishi Sunak today. What should he do now?
Well, that's a decision for him, but I hope all Conservative MPs and indeed all members of Parliament will support the committee that they appointed, that has done the job that the House of Commons asked them to do, and they'll back up the decision that they've made, which is based, if you read the whole report, on very, very detailed evidence. So not just Rishi Sunak, but all MPs, I hope, will get behind and support the committee in the conclusion that they've reached. Because if we don't want to turn into the kind of politics we see in the United States at the moment, where everything is polarized, you've got large numbers of people who don't believe in the result of the last election because Donald Trump says it was a stolen election, essentially. That's where our politics ends if people choose to believe these conspiracy theories and don't base their decisions on the facts. We've had a committee look into this in real detail, and they've come up with a damning conclusion about the way Boris Johnson behaved, and they deserve the support of the whole House of Commons.
Thank you very much for being on Newsnight tonight. We appreciate you talking to our audience. Lord Barwell, thank you. Let's talk to Labour's Tulip Siddiq, who is here. Good evening. Mr. Johnson says he genuinely believed he was sincere at the time and was being honest with the House when he made those statements. What do you say to that?
I don't believe him. The report is damning. You've seen it in detail, Victoria. The committee spent a whole year looking at the report, and the conclusion is very clear. Boris Johnson broke the law. He then lied repeatedly. He misled Parliament. He had opportunities to go to the committee and clarify what it was all about and give evidence. He refused that. Once the report was published and the conclusion absolutely 100% says Boris Johnson is a liar and he did mislead Parliament, he then, to make matters worse, refuses to apologise, refuses to accept this decision that a committee, a cross-party committee, has made, and instead doubles down on it using inflammatory language like a kangaroo court, witch hunt, saying that they're out to get him, it's malicious. It's disgraceful behaviour from a man who was Prime Minister.
Is there a chance that this could end up essentially making Boris Johnson some kind of martyr?
I have to say, when I was in my constituency today, and my predecessor, Glenda Jackson, died today, so we were speaking to lots of people, not one person had any shred of sympathy for Boris Johnson. And I'll tell you why, Victoria. The country listened to what the government was saying during the pandemic. Earlier on your show, you had this mother who lost her son. There were people who were telling me that they said goodbye to their parents over Zoom while the ventilator was being taken away because we weren't allowed to see people. I mean, I also missed out on lots of big events, not funerals, but big events. Everyone made sacrifices during the pandemic and they stuck to the law and listened to the government. Boris Johnson was Prime Minister. No one has any sympathy for him. He's not a martyr. He should apologise, and he also should apologise to the country as well.
The Liberal Democrats are calling for Rishi Sunak to cut off Boris Johnson's 115 grand allowance that former Prime Ministers get. Is that something Labour would consider doing if you were to win the next election?
I mean, I think we would consider it, but for now, I think the things that we would really like Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to grow, a backbone and stand up to the former Prime Minister. There's a few things he should be doing. One is reversing the honours list. He really should be doing that. I'm not quite sure why the Prime Minister decided to agree this honours list before the report was published.
Okay.
I mean, it looks like a grubby deal there.
Should Boris Johnson have his parliamentary pass withdrawn?
I think he should. I mean, he broke the law, he lied, he's in contempt of Parliament. Why should he have the pass?
Should he be barred from national events where we see former Prime Ministers like at the Cenotaph in November?
I think we'd have to let events themselves decide whether they, want to invite him or not. I'm hoping after people read the report, they don't want him at their events anyway.
Tulip Siddiq, thank you very much. Thank you. And Nick is here. There you are. What are you hearing tonight, Nick?
Well, I would say there's growing confidence in Cabinet that it is absolutely over for Boris Johnson. I was talking to one member of the Cabinet and they were saying they expect members of this close-knit Boris Johnson group to turn on each other when those Cabinet ministers who expected a period realised that Boris Johnson was told very clearly the procedures that need to be followed. Boris Johnson says that wasn't the case. It was interesting, you saw I bumped into a number of Cabinet ministers outside Downing Street. They didn't want to say anything because they didn't want to poke him. But it's difficult. I think there's a consensus. It's difficult to see Boris Johnson coming back before the next general election. But he's hoping that Rishi Sunak will lose and then he will be seen as the saviour. I said this on Radio 4 about half an hour ago. Got texted by a long-serving Conservative MP after I said that. And this person said about the idea of Boris Johnson eventually coming back, "You must be joking. It's over. Finished. He's politically dead as a dodo. Ended. Full stop."
Monday, what happens?
Well, the report has to be debated by MPs. There is then the chance of a vote on that. It's a substantive motion. Do we approve this? What would happen is the Speaker would say, as many of that say, aye, you'll get a big cheer. The question is, how many shout no? Because the Boris Johnson, you heard Brendan Clark-Smith, they want to say no, but do they really want to show that he may, if he's lucky, possibly only have 20, maybe 30 supporters out of a parliament of 630. So yes, they want to say we don't like this. They love to register a no vote, but do they want to actually show what his level of support is?
Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you. Now, Boris Johnson's rise was almost as remarkable as his recent rapid descent. Can any other politician claim to have better mastered the art of the photo op? Here's David with a reminder.
Boris Johnson, what have you been doing?
As a political figure, Boris Johnson's stardust is, or perhaps was, unrivaled. In City Hall, which provided the platform for his rise to number 10, he made headlines as much for his photo opportunities as his policies. Good copy and good entertainment, relentless demand for Johnson saw him pop up in Albert Square.
Please call me Boris.
Luxury. And become a regular on comedy panel shows.
Good evening and welcome to Have I Got News For You? I'm Boris Johnson.
At almost every turn, his X factor was amplified by his vivid relationship with the media. Some believe Johnson's bluster and bravado helped him bypass proper scrutiny on his way to Downing Street.
That was so smoothly done, wasn't it?
A strategy spelled out by the man himself on the BBC in 2006.
You show them, you pepper the media. What you do is you've got to pepper their positions with so many gaps that they're confused, like chaff, like a helicopter throwing out chaff.
Well, even before he reached Downing Street, some parts of Johnson's private and past lives had led to some tough questions.
Making up quotes, lying to your party leader, wanting to be part of someone being physically assaulted. You're a nasty piece of work, aren't you?
Well, I think all three things I would dispute.
But the consummate media operator was also unafraid to sidestep scrutiny when it suited him. During the 2019 election, at times, the everyman famously became a nowhere man.
We have been asking him for weeks now to give us a date, a time, a venue. As of now, none has been forthcoming. No broadcaster can compel a politician to be interviewed, but leaders' interviews have been a key part of the BBC's primetime election coverage for decades.
It was questions over Partygate that eventually led to some of Johnson's toughest public appearances in Parliament and on television.
He is on the record saying under oath, you are lying, that you were warned about this event and you went ahead anyway, that you knew.
I can tell you categorically.
Really?
But even through the turbulent last few days, the now former PM and former MP has managed to shape much of the media narrative about his downfall. His political career is over for now, but some believe we'd be mugs to imagine he might manage another comeback.
Right, let's try and look ahead to what might happen next. We've got
I've been
an
too
expert
busy
panel
to
of
be an
Westminster
MP.
Watchers. Stephen Bush is associate editor and columnist at the Financial
I
Times.
love Lady
Christine
Diana.
Harvey is senior political correspondent at the Daily Express, and Joe Tanner is a political communication strategist at AppCo Worldwide, who worked with Boris Johnson to get him into City Hall. Welcome, all of you. Thank you for your patience. Right, can we just pause for a second? Can you put today into context in terms of its significance?
Well, I think actually today individually is not that significant, but the big significance this week is that when Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister, he had this idea of I'm going to have this very broad cabinet, I'm going to try and hold the party together, I'm going to avoid anything that splits me on the right, splits me on the left. And essentially we've seen the end of that strategy this week. It did not work. Bits of the government machine keep falling off, and we saw a very different approach starting on Monday, continuing through today, of saying, actually, look, I am different from, well, not his immediate predecessor, but his predecessor but one. I'm going to have a different approach. Now, I'm not saying I necessarily think that will end in election victory or will end particularly well for Rishi Sunak, but that does mean we're now in a very different phase of relations within the government, relations within the Conservative Party. So that's quite a big shift, I think.
Okay, what about you, Christian?
So I sort of agree. I think really the big sort of explosive moment was Friday when Boris Johnson resigned, and I think it sort of pulled the rug from under the feet of the committee in a way. I think it sort of dampened the how exciting today ultimately was. I think.
Have you read the report?
I did actually.
Yeah.
I did look. Obviously it's very interesting, but I don't think anyone in the country is going to change their minds. I think everyone going into today knew where they were. It was either a kangaroo court stitch up or Boris Johnson was being proved to be a liar, as they've already known for many years now. What I would say is that there are 2 points. Firstly, I think the 90-day suspension thing is the best hope Boris can now cling on to in terms of galvanising support amongst the Tory grassroots.
I.e., he's been persecuted.
I think that is going to come across as so over the top. It's much more than Margaret Ferrier MP got for going between Scotland and London with actual
totally
COVID.
different, isn't
Yes,
it?
but it's also, it's the second largest, longest suspension since Keith Vaz, right? So I think a lot of people are going to feel aggrieved that it's as large as it was. And the second point, as I wrote about today, was that actually I think Rishi Sunak could come to regret this, because for many months now, Boris Johnson has essentially been taking a lot of political flack and attention from both the media and the opposition. And now he's out of Parliament. I think, desires for Tory pounds of flesh are not going to stop with Boris Johnson. They're now going to turn onto Rishi Sunak, as we saw today, with questions about whether he misled Parliament over not attending parties when he actually received a fine. And that is going to go on for a lot longer. And Rishi Sunak might regret not having Boris around to take that flack.
Do you agree with that, Joe, that assessment?
I think the significance of today is that this is the start of the divide that's existed in the Tory party being ripped open again hugely. We're all going to be looking ahead, I think, to the weekend and the dissection of the report and, claims and counterclaims about whether the evidence in the report actually stacks up the words. But then by Monday, we're in this interesting position of MPs who would have gone back to their constituencies, who will be told one way or the other by their constituency association chairman, by members about what they think. Their inboxes will surely be starting to pile up already, with people being concerned about which way they think that their MP should vote. And the fact that it's a one-line whip on Monday and the party not taking a particular view means that you're left with this kind of free-for-all, which on the one hand is good. On the other hand, everyone's going to be looking and saying, well, hang on a minute, what are the key players in the Tory party, the hierarchy, going to actually do?
Yeah. In that sense, is it how much of a test is it for Rishi Sunak?
It's a test in many ways, because it's not only a test about Boris and about whether he's going to sort of put this clear water between them, but actually as Prime Minister, there's a dangerous precedent being set. The committee talk themselves about the precedent being set with what they've actually done. And the problem with that is that's an issue for any minister, any prime minister, any future prime minister, even Keir Starmer if he gets in, as to how you're going to be treated.
Well, all
if
you have to
something
do is, if you get something wrong, go back and correct it.
Exactly, which is what he didn't do. It's not difficult, but it's about that precedent being set for a level of punishment.
What do you think of that?
I think actually in terms of the constitutional precedent, it's not that big of a deal because he had many opportunities to get out of it. But in terms of that divide in the Tory party and yet what MPs hear from their associations, if over the weekend lots of MPs start saying, actually, I've got to vote against this sanction because if I don't, my members will do something bad to me, then we are in for a prolonged period of internal war in the Conservative Party. If, however, and actually, if you look at, say, the Conservative Home Survey, which, yes, it's not representative, but it tends to be a pretty useful straw in the wind, and they're saying, actually, no, look, it's time to move on. If that's what MPs hear from their members, because the interesting group to watch here are MPs in heavily Remain places where they fear the Lib Dems. Now, it would be in their interests to be able to vote against it. But if they think, well, if I vote against it, my association's going to eat me, they'll abstain. And I think either way, if we see people feeling they have to go and vote with Boris, that's quite an interesting sign. And if we see people who feel they can vote with their constituencies, that's quite an
And the
interesting
timing's
sign.
interesting because there's still MPs waiting to be selected. So the problem is some MPs have actually already struggled with their selections because there's been a backlash about their actions, perceived actions towards Boris Johnson anyway. So you're going to see a bit more of that as well. So it's quite a challenge for MPs as to what they do next.
How damaging could Boris Johnson be from the sidelines? You know, TV shows, hosting a TV show, a radio show, writing a column again.
Well, I think there are two aspects to that. The first is that he's not gone out in glittering circumstances, right? And also, I think the way he's gone out is going to be more offensive to the media class sensibilities that would hire him to do a TV show or a radio show. It's a bit more distasteful the way he's gone out, firing on all cylinders.
Some newspaper's going to pay him £250,000 a year, if not more.
Spectators up for sale at the moment, which that might be an attractive option. The thing is, right, he doesn't need that. He's got so many speaking gigs. He's being paid tens and tens of thousands.
It's actually not about the money, though. It's about a platform, isn't it?
That's
to keep
the thing. So
poking Rishi Sunak.
I just think he'd want all or nothing. Do you know? I think he'd either want to be an MP or go off and do speaking gigs.
But I think either way, his parliamentary career is over for now. His political career isn't. They're two very different things. For now, that's the issue, and he used that phrase himself in his resignation.
I mean, he told our readers, "I'll be back,"
and that he's been and anyone that writes Boris Johnson off is very foolish. But the reality is, you look at someone like Tony Blair. You don't have to be in the House of Commons to use a platform. He's very passionate about Ukraine. He's gone off and even while being an MP, he's gone off to the States and been walking the corridors talking about what should happen with Ukraine. He's clearly very passionate about that and will continue to be, a voice on that sort of issue. People will still, there is still an audience for him. The fact we're talking about it again tonight,
Sure.
There is still an audience for people.
Does he want Rishi Sunak for the Conservatives to lose the next election?
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, this is why, look, ultimately...
Why do you say, yeah, of course? I mean, they're Conservatives.
Yeah, but it's that old saying about how the opposition is on the other side, but your enemies are the ones. Ultimately, Rishi Sunak's resignation is why Boris Johnson is not still Prime Minister, right? And everything that's unfolded in the...
Although Sajid Javid resigned before Rishi Sunak,
he could have, although Sajid Javid's resignation was an important first step, I think he could have shrugged that off, but the loss of a second chancellor, the fact that it exploded into the open, their various divides over tax and spend, that was the beginning of the end for Boris Johnson, and everything that has happened since has been about the outworking of that internal civil war. And look, obviously, if you are Rishi Sunak, it is good for you that your most dangerous opponent is no longer an MP, and then as long as you are leader, you can prevent him from becoming a parliamentarian again. But crucially, there is always going to be a group of people in the party who go, we lost because we weren't sufficiently right-wing, and they'll have this kind of fantasy idea of Boris Johnson. And equally, there'll be a group of people go like, well, we lost because we didn't keep our promises on levelling up, healthcare, etc., and they'll want to get to the real Boris Johnson, so he will haunt the party for a long time, one way or the other.
Kamikaze MPs who are all standing down. So there's a whole bunch in there that aren't really thinking about what next at all, which makes it a very interesting parliament.
Thank you, all of you. Front pages, you might be interested in this. Daily Mail, Tory revolt over vindictive bid to banish Boris. And then at the top, starting tomorrow, our erudite new columnist who will be required reading in Westminster and across the world. Question mark. Look, silhouetted face.
That's not Nadine Dorries, I'm afraid.
No, it looks like Boris Johnson's head with a big red question mark on it. The Daily Mirror, he'll tell you it's a witch hunt. He'll tell you it's democracy betrayed. He'll tell you he did nothing wrong, but just one word tells his story. Liar. And The Guardian, the verdict on Johnson and a photograph of him with his back to us, misled Parliament, undermined democracy, complicit in abuse of MPs. And the Times, end of the road for Johnson. That's it. Thank you all very much. That's all from us. I am back tomorrow. We'll have a special report from Tunisia on the Mediterranean boat crossings following the tragic news out of Greece, with at least 79 people drowned and hundreds more feared dead. Till then, from all of us here.
Hello, after what for most of us has been another dry day with warm sunshine, there is a bit of a change on the way as we head toward British.
All I want to do is smoke.
Is that what introduced?
The fact of the matter is, there's support at the bottom, there's comfort at the top, and the people in the middle get nothing.
Yeah.
And the woman just a bit further forward in the pink, colourful pink top. Yes, you.
Yeah, I mean, I had a mortgage in the late 80s and 90s, and I was there when it was 16%. So I know the pain everybody's feeling. And I always said to myself I was going to spend my life getting all my bills paid down so I could get a life of comfort and retire and not have to worry about things. So fortunately, I have paid my mortgage down, and I'm not in that situation. But I feel for people, because what I'm saying, the anger and the frustration that I feel tonight is, we've opened the show talking about Boris. Boris is sucking the life out of things. It's given the Conservative Party a constant sort of look at this over here while we're all dying over here from starvation, not being able to actually feed ourselves, not being able to put our heating on over the winter.
Feed ourselves?
We're in summer, so the temperature's
Really?
gone off that now. People
Let me go and get a pasty.
used their savings. Some of us didn't get any help in COVID lockdown. We were, 3 million people self-employed didn't get any help. Their savings have already gone. They've spent it all on heating. They've spent it all on extra food. Now you're hitting them with mortgages. What's going to give before you have thousands and thousands and thousands of people losing their homes? You're making people 55-year-olds wanting to go back to work like me. There's no incentive for me to go back to work. My pension is paid. I can't put any more into it. You want to tax me and use my national insurance to pay for what? There's no incentive for me to go back to work, other than the fact you need us to go back to work because you need to keep paying everybody else, because you've just absolutely screwed up the economy. There's going to be so many people out here, and they're about to lose their homes, and you're sat there making excuses and blaming everybody else.
I'll come back to you. I'll get around this time.
I think it's sort of fascinating to listen to you, because when we had the first question, I thought, yes, we should do something about mortgages. And then every person who's spoken since has talked about something else. And then I thought, yes, we should do something about food. And then I thought, yes, we should do something about renting. And yes, we should do something. And obviously we can't do everything, right? There is a limited amount of money in the state. So I think the conclusion I've sort of come from listening to everyone is that probably if I was in charge, which thank heavens I am not, this is their problem, I think I'd probably be looking at the safety net, to be honest, right at the bottom, universal credits, something like that. That's probably what lever I'd pull. And I do appreciate what you said about nothing for people in the middle, but so many things are wrong at the moment. My instinct is we're basically, I'm hoping for the government to try and do the bare minimum.
I think we need a lot more honesty in public life. I find this. No, I really do. I love it. I just love it. That's great. Grown-up honesty, not about party.
Yes, why do you think people are laughing at that?
No, but let's not go back to Boris, because that's what we're trying to say. Last year, when the obsession was with Partygate, he was trying to work out not only how to help people with their bills last year, £37 billion package. That's a lot of money last summer to cushion the pain. But he was thinking, how do we avoid being in the same situation at the end of the decade with another cost of living crisis? And that is looking beyond tomorrow, beyond next week, beyond the next election to, we need more nuclear power stations, we need more offshore wind. We need to take the decisions now that make those things happen so that we're not at the end of the decade like a madman, reliving a problem that we've had now. And so the only way we can really address this is to grow the economy and to take the burdens off those people who are growing the economy. And one key factor nobody mentions, nobody's going to stick up for that wild sort of 4 weeks when, there were two people in charge of the economy.
Well, you might, because obviously you supported this trust.
But
we've got someone on the panel who supported this trust.
You keep saying you didn't come to me. I'm looking
but a really serious one. When I say, let's be honest, that the government spent £400 billion paying people to stay at home, being economically inactive during the lockdown. They did it for noble reasons, to save lives, to stop people dying. But we can't pretend that £400 billion is not an awful lot of money that now means there isn't money to do all the other noble things that should be done.
How much of that money?
So if we can be honest about that, not just about whether somebody said this.
How much of that money was wasted on dodgy PPE contracts on Matt Hancock's face that had to be buttoned because it wasn't?
There's £400 billion. Most of it went to people who had to close their business, who had to stop going to work, who had to shut down their restaurant. And the reasons for that were noble at the time. But let's be honest, if you really want honesty in public life, let's be honest that money doesn't grow on trees, and £400 billion was a lot of money. And that's why we're in trouble now, not because even Liz Truss couldn't lose us £400 billion.
Okay, your chance.
Okay, we put together, on top of that 400 billion, there was 94 billion pounds that was put together for cost of living support, and that helped to pay for half of people's fuel bills over the winter. So we're really aware of the points that you raised. But the lady there talked about investment in the United Kingdom. I agree with you. We were able to raise that money through taxing oil and gas companies in the UK at 75%. And I hope that the SNP and Lord Blunkett are going to tell us why they want to shut those industries down, why they want to stop any more oil and gas being pulled out of the North Sea, which is going to destroy 200,000 British jobs and force us to spend even more money bringing in oil and gas from abroad whilst throwing people out of work. What is that going to do?
And what about the woman then who said you're sitting here just making excuses? You said, no, I'm not.
I'm not making excuses because of what that lady said and what you said, madam. You're absolutely right. There is a real problem with cost of living at the moment. We're not hiding from it at all. I totally recognise it. But Gizzo had a point. When we spent £400 billion in the way that we did, we know from what happened a year ago that if you borrow money, then there is an impact. There's an impact eventually on inflation and mortgage interest rates. If you tax people more in order to give money back to other people, that has an impact on some people's living standards. So there are no easy answers. We cannot magic the money out from nowhere, and we're doing the very best that we can. And that's why I'm very proud that the government made it a priority to make sure that pensions and benefits and that the minimum wage all went up in line with inflation, and that there were additional payments to the most needy, £900 to the households on benefits, £300 for pensions, £150 for those on disability. Has it reached everyone? No, it hasn't. But we're doing absolutely our very best because we recognise the problems which you've raised.
Yes, what about the middle group?
Well, the gentleman made the point about ULEZ, but I've already made that point, so I completely agree with you. It's absolutely ridiculous that we've got a Labour council in London, a Labour government in Wales that want to bring in extra charges on people just for driving to work, people who can't afford the top of the range electric cars. And I totally condemn that and wouldn't want to see that happening in Wales.
Quite a few hands. I'm going to spend a little bit longer on this before I move on to another question. The man there in the black t-shirt.
The lady mentioned about universal credit. You can't trust universal credit or PIP. My brother is severely disabled. He actually needs PIP, and they've turned around.
Just for those who don't know what PIP is.
Yes. So my brother is really disabled. He can't go back to work. My mum's now got to go to court, who I'm with today. She's got to go to court with my brother to get his PIP back. So you can't trust it.
Okay. And the man over there in the blue shirt.
It's a known fact that in the UK we've got some of the worst insulated properties in Europe. We're wasting lots of energy, and we're having to help people out because they can't afford to pay their energy bills. I think we should be doing much more to insulate properties. I mean, the more we do that, the more we're going to save. The less power we're going to have to generate. And be more self-sufficient. But I think it's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer to start.
The man in the white t-shirt there. No, further back. Yes, if you keep your hand up, we can find you. There you go.
Said like Rishi Sunak is reduced the numbers of boats. Is a complete liar.
And I tell you that now because he put a tweet up the other day saying that it's reduced the numbers of boats. Last weekend was the biggest rise of the small boats coming across. And my next question is, how much are the Conservative government wasting to transition the ex-MOD camps to migration centres? Of taxpayers' money, what you're going to be wasting? Well, when you can use that as part of helping cost of living.
I mean, there's two issues there. First of all, the numbers overall have been going down this year, and there have been thousands of people stopped from coming over from France. I agree with you. You're right to hold us to account on this because it is very important we tackle it. Secondly, we were spending millions of pounds every day on housing people who come here illegally in hotels. That is unacceptable, and it's much better that people are housed in more basic accommodation because we have to take away the incentive that makes people want to come here in the first place. And again, we're sitting here in Wales. We have a Welsh Labour government that is now paying a £20,000 salary, a universal basic income, to underage asylum seekers in certain local authority areas, which they see as a pilot, which they want to extend, and which is going to be a magnet, which will encourage even more people to risk their lives and come into this country illegally. I'm perfectly supportive of safe and legal migration to people who come over to this country legally. But what I would not do is to encourage people to come over here by small boats because it will end in tragedy and it ends in people being exploited. And it's also unfair on the people who live in this country.
Okay. I'll take another, if you don't mind, I'm just going to take another question from Catherine Parnell. Catherine Parnell, where are you? Oh, right. Let's hear from you.
Are Victorian abortion laws still appropriate in 2023?
Right, so Catherine, you're raising this because I'm sure most, if not all of you, are aware that a mother of 3 has been jailed for 28 months for inducing an abortion after the legal limit being 24 weeks, and she was considerably
that was crazy.
That, and she is now going to serve time in custody. Charlotte.
Yeah, I saw obviously the same news story that you saw, and I really didn't like it. I think obviously what we saw there was someone.
She got arrested, right, for having an abortion, right? NHS killed 45 babies in Kent.
Happened there for this woman herself. It's not like she's going to be coming back and repeat offending every year. That is not something that people are doing repeatedly for fun, let's be honest. And the fact that she has ended up in prison for this, whether or not you think she did the right or wrong thing, I think helps absolutely no one. It doesn't help her. It certainly doesn't help her 3 children who have lost their mum for a few years. I don't feel happier or safer for it. I don't think any woman in the country feels happier or safer for it. And I don't think it protects children in any way, shape or form. I wouldn't say...
Do you think there should have been any sanction?
I think she did break the law as it exists, but a custodial sentence, sending someone to jail for that, for me, just seems to benefit absolutely no one. It also doesn't feel particularly like justice for me. What I will say, and I always worry when we talk about abortion, is I think we often, as a country, act like we're little America, and we sort of import America's fights. And obviously America have a much bigger fight on their hands when it comes to abortion rights than we do. And I sometimes worry that by importing that fight a bit, we almost open it up as more of a discussion than it has to be. This is a settled debate in this country. People, if you poll them, believe in the right to abortion. And sometimes I worry that by sort of hyping it up into an Americanized style, we almost open it up and say, go on, let's talk about it. Let's talk about whether abortion is okay or not, when we all know it is okay.
Well, the question, I think why the reason I asked the question is because the woman has gone to prison.
She has, but under, we all have this settled agreement that the laws as they exist broadly work. The custodial sentence, I don't think, is necessarily part of that.
David Linden, do you think that it's a law from 1861, offences against a person. Do you think we should be scrapping that?
Look, I understand that for a lot of people this is a really sensitive topic, but I cannot get away from the fact that a mother who has 3 children has been put in prison as a result of this, and I think we should be mindful of the fact this was probably a very difficult thing for everybody involved. But the idea that we would use prison, which I think most of us would accept, is to rehabilitate people and also to make sure that the rest of society is safe. The idea that we would use prison to put that woman in there, deprive her of her time with her 3 children, I just think is a tremendous waste of the judicial system that's already under a huge amount of pressure. And my thoughts are very much for those 3 children who have lost their mum.
So do you think it should be decriminalised? In Northern Ireland, it's a different system, and in Northern Ireland, the woman would not be penalised. It would be the medical professional who had administered the substance or the retailer.
I mean, the fact that this legislation dates back to 1860, I think, tells you yourself that this is something that has to be reviewed. It's got to be reviewed by senior ministers, because we cannot have a situation where a woman goes to prison for several years and leaves behind her 3 children as a result of legislation that is 200-300 years old.
Woman with the blonde hair, and I think you've got your glasses in your hair, yes.
Yeah, I completely agree with both of you, and I'm quite pleased that you brought up the American issue as well, because I think this sets a really dangerous precedent in light of what is going on in America with their really strict abortion restrictions. And as the medical community wrote to the judge on this trial, they advised against a custodial sentence because it will dissuade people from accessing this very vital healthcare. And regardless of what you think about term limits on abortions, I completely agree there is no benefit to anyone for this lady going to a custodial sentence. It's certainly not a benefit to her existing children. And yeah, I just think as a woman, it's a very scary time.
Okay, woman at the back in the glasses.
Hi, I think it's ridiculous that this lady's received such a long sentence when paedophiles receive much less.
Okay.
I don't disagree with much of that. I don't feel happier or safer by the fact this woman's got to prison. Although, interestingly, we are all now, discussing a quasi-legal decision, and by doing that, we're not in any way, I don't think, threatening the courts or the law or anything. But it is slightly contradictory to what we were doing 20 minutes ago, when we were told that under no circumstances should anyone be querying the committee. But let's leave that to one side.
You said that you were not querying.
I'm not. But lots of other people were bringing that up. So I respect your process. So we have to respect what the judge has done. I don't feel happy. I would look at it. I mean, personally, I voted for buffer zones outside abortion clinics because I don't think it's right that women who are exercising their legal right to abortion should be, frankly, intimidated by people who may say that they are peacefully protesting, but they're not. What they're doing is, in my view, intimidation of very vulnerable people. And I think that all of the women who are involved. I actually think that 24 weeks is too high. So I'm probably not making friends with anyone. I think it's actually not that contradictory to think that any woman who finds themselves in that situation is a victim and should not be stigmatized, but to be able to raise concerns about the 24-week limit. And I hope
what do you think it should be?
Well, I tell you what, I think we should have a proper discussion with medical professionals, not people outside abortion clinics leading it. I also agree with that. The point the lady made, and yourself, David, and I think Charlotte, that we do not want to turn this into a sort of US-style debate where you're either on one side of the argument or on another side. There should be a reasonable, pragmatic way of dealing with this in a grown-up fashion, and the women who find themselves in that situation deserve this subject to be debated in a reasonable way. So that's my view on it.
Just out of interest, if you think 24-week limit is too high,
I'm not going to get drawn on this.
No, but you must have a view on what you think it should be.
I
If you think
it should be
24 weeks is too
I would
high.
listen with an open mind, but I think I've shown my open-mindedness by being quite happy to vote with Labour MPs for buffer zones outside abortion clinics, because I don't think any woman who exercises their legal right to abortion should be intimidated in any way.
This is the man here in the middle in the white shirt. Hang on, just start again. We couldn't hear you.
Is not anyone going to speak up for the unborn child, though, if it was near 8 months, when perfectly healthy babies can be born at 6 and 7 months and 8 months? Not one person has spoke up for the child.
Well, you are now, and do you think it's right that she should go to prison as a
if
result?
there's a week's limit, there's a week's limit. That's the law. What about the child? Perfectly healthy children born at 7 months and 8 months.
I think the law was clearly broken. There's no doubt about that.
It is marriage. It is death, and that's the law. If that's the law, that's the law.
Look, maturing white men are not always the best people to make judgments on this. But given that,
hang on, he just wants to come back.
No, I'm just going to say,
I take issue with the comment. I take issue with the comment. What does my colour got to do with the
no,
debate?
I was talking about
That's
myself.
disgusting comment.
I was talking about myself. I'm the maturing white male, and I'm very diffident. I took part in the embryology bill debate 30 years ago. It was difficult then, and it's really difficult now. And the thing I fully agree with is that we mustn't Americanize this really sensitive debate. It isn't for or against, it's getting it right. We've got three conjunctions here of the termination pill, the 10-week pill, which was allowed to be prescribed without consultation, without face-to-face consultation during COVID, and has now been codified, so that's available. We've got the 1861 Act, the overriding of the situation in Northern Ireland back in 2019 because of the failure of the Northern Ireland devolution to be able to deal with the issue and the anomalies. We've got to actually try and sort all those things out without falling into the trap of saying that termination of the level that you've just spoken about, 8 months on, is acceptable, because it is not. It can only be acceptable if it saves the life of the mother. And what came out of it for me was the lack of support, the fear, the worry of that woman. And we had an interchange in the Lords this morning. We do try and do some good when it was very clear that it will go to appeal, that there's something called the royal prerogative, that it is possible that this will be overturned, and a community sentence would have been and will, in my view, be most appropriate. But let's not get it mixed up with the right to choose is inalienable. I accept it, that the woman's right to choose, but not to choose to have an abortion at 32 weeks. It is just not acceptable.
Okay, let's look at the woman here.
My son was born at 30 weeks. That child is certainly a viable child. And like that gentleman, I do
Babies are getting killed by the NHS. People are growing up, right, and getting abused by the NHS. NHS are disgusting.
law. And without the ability